Macy, thank you so much for joining us for this final Meet the Editors session. It's really, really great to have you. So yeah, can you just tell anyone who's watching what you do and the multiple roles you have?
Well, thanks for inviting me, Sandy. I really do appreciate it. It's fun to talk about editing and manuscripts and publishing, so I appreciate it. I am a professor at the School of Social Work at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I have been here now 20 years in this role as a faculty member, and then currently as a professor. And I kind of have three hats right now. I'm a professor, so I teach, I work with graduate students, mentor graduate students, and then I also do research. And I have several of my own research projects that are ongoing. Some are funded by the United States government or foundations, and I'm doing a lot of evaluation work for domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking services in community-based settings here in the United States. So that's kind of one role. And then I also am the associate dean for research for our School of Social Work. So I help to build research capacity and research infrastructure so that our faculty can be successful with their research. And then and most importantly for this conversation, I edit the Journal of Family Violence. And I've been in this role since 2017. So almost this fall, it'll be 4 years editing the journal. So, and I've published a lot of places, and I've been an associate editor at Psychology of Violence, and, have been a reviewer on lots of different journals. So I come to this conversation with experience as an author, including one who's gotten lots of rejections as well as acceptances, and then as a reviewer, and now as an editor. And I'm happy to offer what my perspectives are. Just want to say that up front, these are just my perspectives, and I know a lot of reasonable people can disagree or have other recommendations, but I'll offer what I can.
Well, that's great. It can, the reason we're speaking to multiple people is because we know everyone's got a slightly different experience and a slightly different view of publishing as a whole. So before I ask you the questions that our ECRs have sent, I thought it'd be interesting just to hear a bit about what your editor role involves on a kind of daily or weekly basis.
That's a great question. So the journal, we have a kind of a small team of us that work on the journal, and the journal is sponsored by a publisher, Springer Nature. Springer Nature has staff who help me with. They're assigned to the journal, and they work in different places all over the globe, but they help me with vetting the papers as they come in, and then also once papers are accepted, then moving them towards publication. So I really focus on the part in between. So when a paper lands on my desk, I look at it and I look and see, is this consistent with our aims and scopes? Is this something that I think our peer reviewers will be interested in and be willing to review? And how do we have other papers like this already in the publication pipeline? And so I also look at formatting too. If formatting is really not consistent with what the journal does, I have to kind of take that into consideration. And then I decide either at that point to desk reject or send the paper on to reviewers. And then I have a small team of associate editors that I work with. And so sometimes I actually handle most of the manuscripts, but I also have associate editors who help me. And then we send those out for review. We try to do our best to at least get 2 high quality reviews, ideally 3, with the idea that even if a paper's rejected, we still want to give authors really constructive feedback so that they can take their work. They could take that feedback, think about it, and then do something else with the paper. Because if it doesn't end up at our journal, we want it to end up someplace. We get about 500 manuscripts a year at JOFV. We've had record-breaking numbers of articles submitted this last year and this year. It used to, when I took over at the journal, we were getting about 250, and now we're getting twice as many, which is a great problem to have. It's good news, but it keeps us very busy. So probably every single day I do a little journal work, or a lot of journal work, trying to look at papers, invite peer reviewers, peer reviewers are all doing this for free and they're all very, very busy. So, sometimes people say, oh, I'd love to, but I can't right now. And so, for some papers, I might ask 10 reviewers before I can get 2 reviews, but, that's part of what we do. So reading papers, inviting peer review, and then looking at peer review and then writing letters. So probably a little bit every day. And partly because too, I don't want papers to just sit at the journal.
Yeah.
I know we're all trying to get our work out there in the world as quickly as possible. And I also know that people's careers depend on timely editorial decisions. So I can't always make a really fast turnaround time, which for us is probably even still 3 months or so. But I try to do what I can. So so it's something every day with the journal, but it's also really a privilege and an honor. And I get to see all this amazing work and really see these conversations that peer reviewers are having with authors. And it really is, kind of a wonderful community that's out there in the world working on violence and trying to make the world a better place, prevent violence and respond to violence. So it's really a pleasure to do this work too.
Yeah, and I'm reminded of I think it's your Twitter bio that caught my eye, and it's something like making the world a better place, one journal article at a time.
Right. Yeah. So, So, it's a small contribution. I'm not going to change the world overnight, but maybe every study that we do, every article we publish, is part of the greater good. So, yeah.
It's a really motivating way to think, because obviously sometimes papers don't get read and that sort of thing. But I think, in violence work, I like to think we do pay attention to each other's work, and it's not a huge field like domestic violence and intimate partner violence. It's kind of, I like to think that they do make an impact. But yeah, it's good to hear about what it's been like for you. I suppose everybody, while on lockdown, has had a bit more time to write than usual. So
I think so.
Yeah. But it's interesting to hear about it from the editor's perspectives, because often it can feel like you're throwing your paper into an abyss, and I don't think we always think about what the editor is. It sounds like a high pressure job. So yeah.
It's never a dull moment. I'm not bored with it, that's for sure. But yeah, it's true, and it does. And I think we don't want it to feel. We want it to be transparent. And I think more publishers are moving to systems that'll enable authors to see, oh, my paper's under review, or and kind of know what's happening, but it can feel a bit mysterious, and that's I don't think we want it to feel that way. And so, people can reach out. I know authors check in with me and say, how's my paper going? And that's more than fine too. And
Yeah, cool. Okay, so when you're doing your editorial work, you've mentioned formatting, and I suppose that's one part of it, but what do editors, or what do you look for in a journal article, and what makes you happy to see?
So I really am happy and excited to see papers. It does help when papers are formatted well, and that seems like a small thing, but I think when I think reviewers or editors read a paper, we're thinking, okay, this is representation of the study itself and the research itself. And so anything authors can do to show, oh, we did this work very carefully and very thoroughly and very rigorously, including the presentation of the paper, is helpful. So it's looking for those. Sometimes it feels like really picky, I think, to authors. Why can't I just submit the paper this way or that way? I think it's still a presentation of the full study. And so we're thinking of that as an indicator of quality of the whole process. So that's important. I also look at formatting because it's just kind of a pain for the publishing part if it isn't formatted correctly. So, and that just makes it go much more smoothly. Reviewers kind of expect to see a certain type of presentation, or the publishing team does too. So it just makes things go more smoothly for the whole process. Also, I really am excited about research that is creative and novel, and that brings up issues that maybe the field hasn't addressed before, or addresses it in a new way. It doesn't have to be wholly novel, but oh, we have this theory that we found works really well in this setting, but we're trying the theory in a new setting, or we're trying to explore a new issue or topic. Clearly presented methods that show how the study was conducted rigorously are really helpful, no matter if those are qualitative or quantitative or a literature review or a theory piece. That section of the paper can be really, really important too. So those are some things I think that really make me excited. Yeah, I'll stop there. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so one of the other editors that we spoke to mentioned about an abstract, writing abstracts. So that was her sort of view, but I wondered for you, is the abstract important? How important is it? And what's a good abstract?
It's a great question. So I think abstracts are extremely important because it may be the only thing an editor reads in terms of making a desk rejection. It may be the thing that the reviewers read and decide, am I going to review this paper or not? And then at the end, when the paper's published, that may be the main thing that your reader actually reads. I mean, because there's so much published, having a really good, strong abstract can be really invaluable. And I find it's helpful to have like abstracts, even if the journal doesn't require, structured abstracts, having an abstract that, briefly discusses the background, the methods, key findings, and then says something briefly about, okay, what's the implication of this finding? Putting that all, and it's hard to do, that's difficult to do in 200, 300 words. Sometimes, I don't know, 150 is some abstract. It's difficult to do. And it's worth taking the time to make that as strong as you possibly can, because so many decision points rest on a strong abstract.
I tend to write mine at the end. I think I say this in another session, but I'm somebody who splurges. Like I write loads and loads and then I whittle it down. And I know some people are the opposite. They kind of want to plan things out and then they just write according to their skeleton plan, which is much more sensible, I would say. But the abstract, I always find I write at the end. I write it at the end, and it's always really it's something quite satisfying about going through your paper and thinking, I've got some really interesting messages here, and I'm just going to copy and paste them and put them into a paragraph and then shape that. And I think it's just it can be a really satisfying thing to do, because you think I've said something really interesting and important here. But yeah, it is hard to get it down to the right number of words. That's a challenge.
But I totally agree. I do the same thing you do, Sandi. I write the whole paper and then I copy and paste. And it's more than fine to copy and paste, because really your abstract should, I think, in my view, reflect your paper. So I use the same method, and I'm the same way. I write lots and lots and then hone it down, because I always figure if I have lots and it's easier to cut than write later. So, but you're right. Everyone's got their style.
Yeah. So what are the main reasons that an article would get rejected then?
So at the desk rejection stage, it may be because of, it doesn't fit the style. It may be because, honestly, we have so many papers coming through the pipeline. If it's pretty repetitive of something, through no fault of the author's own, but, it's some very similar to things that we've already got in the pipeline for publication that might lead to a desk rejection. And then if the methods are not clear or confusing, and I think, okay, reviewers are going to have a hard time with this, then that might be a reason for rejection, desk rejection. What else? I'll say too, well, and maybe while we're talking about desk rejections, I could just mention, desk rejections aren't necessarily a bad thing. I think I would rather, if I look at a manuscript and think, oh, this is not going to be a great fit for the journal, I would rather tell authors quickly so that they can go off and find something else, rather than, waiting for 3 to 6 months and then getting a rejection at the end of that point too. So sometimes it's just trying to find the right fit. And so even when I got a desk rejection not too long ago, and it was like, okay, well, we just need to find a place that's a better fit. That's the editor telling us that this isn't quite the right fit. So I think desk rejections can save authors time, and it's something to think about in terms of, it's not necessarily wholly negative. It's like maybe moving things along.
I agree. Yeah.
And then I think with reviewers really appreciate, so a lot of times I'm looking for, 2 or 3 reviewers who are pretty enthusiastic about the manuscript, even if they're not totally happy with all aspects of it. Partly I'm looking for 2 or 3 reviewers that are happy, because I know if there's just a lot of back and forth between the reviewers and the authors, we can end up, totally rewriting an author's paper, and that's not what publishing is about, in my opinion. And then it just gets exhausting for the authors, to go back and forth, back and forth. So I'm looking for enthusiasm, at least from a couple reviewers, and that potential for the paper to really make it, it's going to be up to publication standards, and all the issues will be addressed in probably 2, at most 3 rounds of revision. Those are things that I'm looking for too.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've published quite a few papers now, and I've had lots of different experiences of journals. And I used to work in a field where qualitative methods weren't so well understood by the really top journals in that field. And there were definitely times where I got exhausted, as you say. And, I think it's nice that you have this kind of approach where you want the reviewers to be enthusiastic, because there are times where the reviewers just don't like it. They make loads of comments, and then you send it again and they do the same, and it just wastes a lot of time, I think. And you might end up with a really great article, which is good, but I think your approach just makes everything more efficient, I think. So,
well, yeah. And sometimes reviewers are wrong, they aren't assessing it the way, and it's just not a good fit for whatever reason. We couldn't get the right reviewer to look at this, or the person with the perfect expertise. So sometimes, I think we can say too, and I've had this experience where I've gotten sets of comments back and thought, oh gosh, we're just not going to be able to make these reviewers happy. So I've withdrawn the manuscript as an author and sent it, I take the comments as they are and think about ways that, okay, we can strengthen it. But my partner, who is also a researcher and academic, says, sometimes reviewers are like, well, we really wanted you to make pizza. We made hamburgers, but then the reviewers are like, but we really wanted pizza from this. And we're like, but we're giving you a really great hamburger. Don't you like our hamburger? And I think that's kind of a funny way to say, sometimes you just there's miscommunication or misunderstanding that you're not going to be able to resolve. And so it's trying to find okay, our reviewers, can they be enthusiastic about this paper at some way is I think helpful for everyone. It doesn't always work, but it can be helpful.
Yeah, definitely. And so one of our ECRs, so they're all early career, obviously, so that a lot of them don't have previous publications, or they may have one. And actually some of them will publish with co-authors who have a lot of previous publications. But anyway, is this something that editors consider? Do editors consider the author's previous publications when deciding whether to send the manuscript for peer review? And what role does that have?
That's a great question. And my response would be no. I'm really judging the manuscripts on what's in front of me and not the author team, especially at the desk reject phase. I think we're really interested. I think journals are interested in new voices, new perspectives. We want to see early career researchers succeed, and we want to help promote early career researchers. If this is a paper that's really novel and interesting from a new person and it gets cited a lot, that's a great thing for our journals. Likewise, having, journals now are being assessed by our publishers on things like how global are our authors, and do we have a diversity of people from different parts of the world and career levels and perspectives. So I think we're really excited to see new voices, new perspectives, new researchers.
That's so interesting. So how does the publisher measure how global? Is it just by country? Is it, we've got this many papers from Brazil and this many from India? Is it like that? Or?
They do. I mean, when I have my annual check-in with my publishing editor, we'll discuss, how diverse is the editorial board in terms of global representation, and also, diversity of people from different backgrounds and experiences and positionalities. We'll think about too, how is what's the representation of reviewers? What's the representation of authors and published work? So having global representation is becoming, I think, increasingly important. So even if the journal's based in North America, we're being asked as editors to make sure that our journals don't just speak to a North American audience, but are, meaningful for people around the globe. So I think that's an emphasis that I think is only going to increase too.
Yeah. I'm really glad to hear that. That's obviously very relevant for the work that we do in our global health team, where everyone's based in the so-called global south, apart from, us in Bristol or UCL or LSHTM, which are the kind of UK-based universities. And kind of on that note, actually, what about English language then? So do editors, when editors get a manuscript that isn't written in perfect, so-called perfect academic English, what does the editor do there? Do they consider the barriers to English academic writing, or is it a desk reject, or what happens?
I consider, because again, I think for me, having diverse perspectives and global representation is incredibly important for the journal. So, and I'm also mindful that, we'll have if the science is strong, if the topic is novel and important, we'll have multiple rounds of revision to improve, and enhance the writing. And there's the copy editing stage too. So, I personally, even if things are not perfect, and especially if I can see okay, the authors have really made an attempt to follow APA and they've done the best they can. Sometimes in the cover letters, people will say, we've had this read by someone whose first language is English. And I have to say too, some of us whose first language is English, we still make mistakes and our papers aren't perfect either. But, sometimes they'll indicate things like that. But I would rather see really good science published and go through the process than to desk reject because of difficulties with English as a second language or third language. So, and that's not true of all journals, but I do think that increasingly, again, because journals are being asked to consider, representation and diversity and inclusion, which are all really important, I think for us to do the best science as a community, I think we're beginning to say, okay, are these issues that, they're maybe a concern, but they can be addressed in revisions and or at the copy editing stage.
So you have copy editors who will kind of edit things just after it's been accepted before publication then?
Exactly. And that's part of the publishing team. Now, again, they won't correct every little thing. And ultimately, it's the author's responsibility to present things as well as they can. And if there's glaring errors, those are going to be, addressed. They can be addressed during copy editing. So, I hate for small things, minor things, even if it's several, to stop good science from appearing in the journal. So, yeah.
I know that as a reviewer, when I first started reviewing manuscripts, I used to always basically proofread and say, there's a comma missing here, this word is spelt wrong, this sentence isn't grammatically correct, blah, blah, blah. And then that would take a really long time. So I tend to now, as a reviewer, just say, find somebody to read this manuscript, proofread the manuscript. And what about your reviewers? Do you ever have reviewers who will reject to the manuscript because the English isn't up to scratch, in their eyes? Is that something that happens, or?
Yeah, definitely. So, I think it's something to be, for the people in your program to be mindful of, that, the stronger the English and the stronger the presentation, the less likely you are to get an editor or reviewer who is negative. I mean, that's, the kind of the reality. Now, that said, as an editor, I also I have discretion, editors have discretion to say, okay, yeah, there are these issues, grammar, English, but there's still a lot here. And this is an important topic, an important, piece of work to publish. So we're going to try to pull it through, so even if a reviewer recommends reject, an editor may still say, oh, but these other reviews are quite positive, and I think there's a lot of value here, so we're going to pull this, we're going to give it a revise and resubmit and see how they come back. So that can definitely happen too. I think, for the new scholars that you're working with, maybe to think of as much as you can, put your best foot forward, right, with these papers. And because you don't want, if possible, you don't want the small things to lead you to a desk reject if that's not necessary. And things can be fixed along the way too.
Yeah. And it's sort of linked to that. So, you mentioned earlier that you like to see new theories or theories that, are being applied in different settings. And so some of the early career researchers in Brazil have talked about theories that are not so well known across the globe, or they haven't come from the so-called global north. And they feel that it's quite difficult sometimes to get, these journals that have ended up being prestigious, that happen to be from the global north, to accept manuscripts that use these sorts of theories that are from Brazil or from the global south. Is this something that, so it sounds to me like this isn't something that you would do, but do you think in publishing in general, editors give preference to authors who use manuscripts that, editors give preference to authors that use theories that are most prevalent in the field, so the global north theories, rather than ones that are from low to middle income countries?
It's a great question. I think, with anything in the world, that people are always assessing things based on what we know, right? And what we're familiar with. And that's a problem, because we should be in the global north as aware of theories across the globe as people in the south are aware of ours, So let me say that first, that I think that this is a deep problem, and it shouldn't be on the people from the global south to solve, So nonetheless, we live in the world that we live in. And so I think a couple practical things I would suggest is, authors in their cover letter, for one thing, just to back up and say, it can be really helpful to put a cover letter in.
Yeah.
And in your cover letter, you can explain, have a short paragraph, and maybe some of the text is just copy paste from your paper. Why is this theory novel and important, and how does it shed a new light on this issue? I mean, having that little paragraph in a cover letter can help alert the editor that, oh, this is something novel and interesting, and oh, maybe my journal could be one of the first to publish this here in North America or wherever the journal. So I think communicating that. Also, you can offer to suggest reviewers to editors.
Yeah.
So if you could say in the cover letter, we're happy to make suggestions for reviewers who are familiar with this theory or that theory, if the editor would like. And that opens the door, because then if I, as an editor, am not as familiar with the theory, and I'm not picking reviewers, I'm not selecting reviewers who know something about the theory, or I'm getting lots of people decline, then if I know, oh yeah, those authors said that they could suggest something, I can reach out to them and get their suggestions. So that's, those might be practical things to think about doing. And then I'll just underscore, I think it's really interesting, solutions are going to come in from all over the world, right, for violence. It's not something that we're going to solve one country or one culture. We're going to need lots of theories. So I think it can be really exciting to have, again, new creative voices and thoughts and novel research. And sometimes even because I'm reading 500 articles a year, I can be like, I'm skimming things and I'm not taking it in as well as I could. And so help make the case to me why this is really novel and could be really important. So just even a short paragraph in a cover letter can really help.
That's some really useful advice. And I think, given that, you've said that one reason that you might desk reject is because it's similar to something in the pipeline, it's too similar to what's already been published. it sounds as though using the theory or talking about a theory that isn't so well known across the world can actually be a real advantage to getting your paper published. So.
I think so. I think that could be really helpful because we want, again, journals want to have a range of theory and methods and perspectives, and we want to be the first one to publish a new idea because that means everything gets cited, you know, and that helps our journal when papers get cited. So
yeah. So in one of the other discussions with editors, he mentioned that, you know, if this is something that is happening and other academics have experienced the same, that a journal is rejecting your work because they're not accepting the theory as kind of being robust or whatever, just because it's not from the global north. It's kind of like an unconscious bias or maybe sometimes a conscious bias. And he recommended that people should come together and kind of, you know, make that known, yell about it. So, and I do think it depends on the journals. And I think, you know, with your journal, you're obviously very open to this sort of thing. So that's really great to hear. And yeah, so I hope some of the early career researchers will look at Journal of Family Violence as a potential home for their work.
I would welcome that. I would welcome it. And I think the other editor has a good point. I mean, sometimes, I mean, I know I have unconscious biases and I have explicit and implicit biases, and I'm not always aware. And so, you know, you can also write me and say, here's why I think that this is an important thing, you know, or can you give me more guidance about why this was rejected? Or, so, you know, those are conversations I would definitely welcome too. So, yeah. And I just saw, I'm on Twitter some for the journal, and I just saw an interesting debate about one journal, which I can't even recall the title, but people were saying, oh, they only take qualitative studies with at least 30 participants, and it got to be kind of a lively debate on Twitter. And so I'm sure the editor noticed that. And it could be good to write to the editor and say, is this really a useful policy? Or, you know, is it time to revisit that policy?
Yeah, so that leads us perfectly on to the next question, actually, which is about sample size. So a lot of people starting out with qualitative work, understandably, are anxious about small sample sizes. And I have definitely had the experience where I had a sample size of 80 participants in a qualitative study, which is huge. And the reviewer said, the sample size is too small for you to make any generalizable conclusions. And obviously I was like,
80, and it's not supposed to be generalizable. Exactly. Did you say that?
Yeah, but then there are, you know, even in qualitative studies, sometimes, like you say, sometimes there is a target and researchers can't meet it. So one of the ECRs has a sample size which is relatively small, so it's less than 10. What are your thoughts then around getting that published? Is it possible, or do they need to interview more people? Or
it's a great question. I think of the methodology. So, you know, and I'm not, I do some qualitative work, but I usually do it with other people because it's not my area of expertise as a methodology. So just forgive me if I totally make a mistake here. But, you know, I've been educated by my associate editors who do have qualitative expertise that, you know, a phenomenological analysis may have a very small sample size, you know, so, but maybe if it's a descriptive qualitative, it should have more, you know, so I think part of it is, and what I try to do when I try to have my editors and reviewers do is, does the sample size and the number of participants match the study aims, methods, and is this going to end up with like are there meaningful implications? So maybe we do need to do a deep dive into a very sensitive issue in family violence, and it's challenging to find people to participate, and adding more participants doesn't necessarily give you a more rigorous study. So so can you make that case? Like if you have a small sample, if you're doing a phenomenological analysis, maybe that's really reasonable. But if it's descriptive, maybe it's less reasonable. So, so that's one perspective. The other thing I would add is maybe you don't have a whole regular research manuscript. Maybe you have a brief report.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's trying to match the the method and results to the type of article. So Journal of Family Violence, I know other violence, I think Journal of Interpersonal Violence, take brief reports. And so maybe you have, instead of a 30 or 35 page article, you have a 15 or 20 page article. So I've had success. We had a study with here in where I live, in the community I live in, we did a study on housing and intimate partner violence. And we were able to talk to 19 survivors about their experience with housing programs here in the United States, because housing's a mess in the United States. Anyway, so we ended up doing that as a brief report because we thought we just had 19 for the purposes of the overall study. We had enough saturation, but we didn't have 80 participants. So we said, well, this is more of a brief report. Let's put it in as a brief report. And we had success publishing it that way. So that might be, and a brief report, if it's peer reviewed, is still peer reviewed. So, put it in that part of your CV or Vita,
Yeah, for sure. That's some more really helpful advice. And I think, I've published something, and it was the first paper I ever wrote, and it was with 8 participants, and it was a journal article, but not one that was not one that has an impact factor, but it's still on my CV. It's still being read. So I think there are options, aren't there? It's just about thinking more broadly about where your journal could go.
And you might look at, as you're thinking about journals, look at how many have they published, studies with small samples, and what sort of methods were used, and is this something that they would be open to? So that can also help, find the right home for your article too.
Yeah. So what would your advice be on how the early career researchers should respond to reviewer comments? Because I know, personally, getting reviewer comments back initially, it can just feel really difficult emotionally. You just think, oh my God, they hated it, or you go through it and you just feel sad or angry, so what's a good way to manage those emotions, and in a more practical sense to manage the actual doing of the responses?
These are really, thoughtful questions and important ones. First of all, I'll say, if you get an invitation to revise, that is good news. So as you're looking at all those comments and kind of thinking about, oh, wow, this is, your first thought is, oh, this is terrible. And it's always good news to get an invitation to revise. That means the editor sees something worthwhile and they want to publish it. It's just now going through the process to get it there. So it feels, oh, why are they telling me all this? And it's really good news. And so always, when you get an invitation to revise and resubmit, always do it, because now you have a foot in the door with that journal. So I think part of it is thinking about this a little differently. Yes, maybe you have a lot to consider and revise, but you actually got a piece of good news when you, so that's a piece of it. I think too, when you go through the comments, really, sometimes I just need to put it away for a week or two. I get the revise, I look at the comments and it makes me grumpy. And then I'm like, okay, let me have a couple of days away or a week away and then come back to it. And then I can look kind of more rationally at the comments. And I usually create a table where I put the comments. I come up with and then there's another column for my response. And then there's a column for where I made the change. The paper. And, really to take each comment one at a time and try to address every single one. Now, that said, and we say this in our editorial letters at the Journal of Family Violence, you might disagree with a reviewer. It's totally reasonable. And it's okay to disagree and push back. You just need to make a case to the reviewer and ultimately the editor that you're doing this for good reason. And then rejection is just part of this academic process. I mean, it's I probably had more rejections in papers and grants than I've had successes. So it's, and it does get easier over time. I can think about myself 20 years ago and how Rebecca felt getting a rejection then. And now I'm like, okay, well, it stings much, much less now. So it does get better. And it's just part of things. And then sometimes reviewers and editors, I mean, I know I'm wrong when I make editorial decisions, and I hope people really, take a rejection, look at the comments. Those are hopefully useful for them as a next step, but it's okay if they put my face up on a dartboard and throw some darts at it. I've been there too. So, I think, just to know we can make mistakes, and don't let our mistake mean the end of your paper or study. Find another home for it.
Yeah, persevere. I think I agree. I've had so many rejections, and I think it always hurts, but it's just so often a part of it. But to celebrate your invitation to revise the article, I think is an important piece of advice, because sometimes you just get lost in all of the comments and you forget to think they like the paper enough for me to resubmit it. So it's worth celebrating, I think.
And they took it really seriously. They're really engaging with you in an academic conversation. So that's a scholarly conversation. So that's a success.
So just a final question then, is there any other advice apart from what we've discussed that you would give to early career researchers who are seeking to publish? And I think, so a lot of people will have masters or PhD theses, and is there anything around turning them into publications that you can give advice on?
That's a great question. One thing to think about is the style for writing for a thesis can be quite different than a manuscript. And so you really definitely, I think, find that target journal that you want to aim for. Maybe you find that because it's something you've cited a lot, or you think it's a good fit. You can always take an abstract from your thesis and then send it to an editor and get their advice. Is this something you'd be interested in or not? But definitely make sure to turn that thesis into something that's going to appeal to the journal. I know for my own doctoral, I think it took me a good year to take my doctoral dissertation and then turn it into papers. It just was part of the process. So you definitely want to do that. And then I guess the other thing in terms of publishing, I think one of the things that most helped me in my career was reviewing for journals. Journals are always looking for reviewers. So if you review, you start to see how the decisions go and what other people are submitting and what editors decide. That can be really invaluable for helping you with your own writing. So, if there's a journal out there that you think, oh, I'd love to review for that journal, email the editor and, send your CV or Vita and a few keywords about expertise, and see if you can get in their reviewer pool. I think reading and reviewing can really help. That really helped me with my own writing. So that can be a great experience. If you have the bandwidth to do it, that can be really helpful.
Yeah. And are there some things that editors could do or should do to support ECRs, aside from, inviting them to review manuscripts? Are there some other things, or?
I think doing things, having opportunities like this to talk about kind of the ins and outs, and to I think publishing can be a bit of a black box, and you don't know what's inside and how the process works. So I think these types of conversations to kind of shine a light in the black box and let people know that there's a way that it's complicated, but it's not a mystery, that there's ways you can figure out how to manage these systems and processes is really helpful. And then one program I've seen recently that I'd like to do at JOFE at some point is kind of matching senior scholars with early career scholars, maybe to help, with reviews or to help with, writing. I mean, so sometimes, and this is true of all of us, wherever we are in the world. I learned how to publish and how to write grants and how to do studies because I had great mentors that supported me and helped me. So I think sometimes if we can think about ways to create those mentoring relationships, especially now when you can hop on Teams or Zoom and have these incredible conversations and interactions, I think it would be great for our field, and maybe Sandi, this is something we can think about. How can we get more senior people to partner with early career people, and how can we like create, stronger research for all of us?
Yeah. I love that idea. I think it's so good, and especially when, especially when you're working with people whose first language isn't English, and actually may have perfect English but may not understand how to use it in the academic sense, which actually people in England don't know how to do.
It's the United States, yes.
It's a very kind of ivory tower skill to develop, and I think having mentors is a really good way to do that and to be led through that. And I think, as some mentors themselves can learn a lot about what it's like for mentees these days, because things are always changing, and and you don't always understand what it's like to be from another country and trying to publish in an American or a British journal. So yeah, there's a lot to be learned there. I think I would definitely agree. Yeah. So that's all of the questions that I wanted to ask you, but I just wanted to say a big thank you for joining, because it's been really great, and the Journal of Family Violence is excellent, and I do hope that people will submit. But yeah, this has been a really excellent opportunity. So thank you so much for taking.
Thanks for inviting me. It was fun. And I hope it's helpful for people. And I wish all the early career participants in your program so much success. I look forward to learning their names and seeing their research studies.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, thank you so much. Take care and bye.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.